Hi, my name is David Wilkes and I'm your independent candidate for the seat of Ford in the upcoming July 2nd election. In this video I want to talk to you about income inequality. Australia has always been a very egalitarian society. When I first started work, a senior manager might, if they were lucky, earn perhaps 3 times what the average worker was earning. We consider someone wealthy if they own their own home, sent their kids to private school, had a nice car. That denoted wealth at that point in time. But times have changed. If we use the example of the 4 CEOs of our 4 major banks, they're each earning around $10 million a year. Compare that with the average Australian worker, the average Australian salary, which is about $75,000 a year. That means that the CEO of the big banks earn in 3 days what it takes the typical worker to earn, or a typical worker 365 days to earn, a full year compared to 3 days of work. Now, I've got to ask you, do you really think the CEOs of the big banks are 130 times more productive than the typical worker, than the typical bank worker even? It stretches credibility for me, and I'm sure that it does for you as well. Now, the biggest challenge is that with that income inequality, we get wealth inequality, and both are about a lot more than money. Because when you have wealth and income at that level, and higher, I mean, if we look at people like Gina Reinhardt, for example, that money gives influence. These people are able to lobby government to achieve their own objectives, right, which may be to free up markets, it may be for tax reform that favours the wealthy. That influence doesn't generally work in the favour of the average person. Right, now, the person on minimum wages in Australia earns about $35,000 a year. So again, compare that to the numbers that I've just given you of $10 million and more. We need to think about ways that we can level the playing field a little bit more again. Right? The challenge is that in Australia right now, 20% of the population already control 80% of the wealth. And if we look at America as an example, that will get much worse. In America, we have 5% of the population controlling 80% of the wealth. So how do we do that? How do we achieve wealth inequality? Well, there are a number of ways that we can do it. One, although it's been immensely unpopular in the past, is to reintroduce death duties or estate taxes. And we do that by putting a minimum value on an estate before it is taxed. And I'd suggest that $10 million is a reasonable figure. That if you die with a net estate of $10 million or more, then 10% of that goes as a tax. And the higher the estate, the higher the value of the estate, the higher the tax. So we might have incremental steps where it goes to 12.5% of the estate, 15% of the estate, 17.5%, and it caps at 20% of the estate. Right, now what that will do is put money back into the system, and it will stop wealth building wealth. It will give everyone a more equal playing field. Another way to do it is through lifting the GST. And again, I know that that's unpopular, but consider this. The people with the most income are the people who spend the most. And GST is a consumption tax. It is only paid when you spend. So obviously the more you spend, the more you pay. The less you spend, the less you pay. Now the thing with GST, lifting it to 15% for argument's sake, and that would be the figure that I'd propose, people on low incomes definitely suffer. Right? They're the ones who can afford it least, and I appreciate and understand that. So there have to be offsets for those people, right? So they're not disadvantaged. But, as I said, by lifting the GST to 15%, the people who are earning the most will pay the most in that consumption tax. Right? There are other ways that we can level the playing field as well. But at this stage, I've given you enough to think about. We need, as I said, to get back to a more egalitarian society. If we don't, then that gap between those who have and those who don't have will increase, not diminish, because of the influence that wealth and income gives. Now, I'll just give you one other thought before we close this video. The world's 80 richest people, so the 80 richest people on this planet, own more wealth than 3.5 billion human beings. Those 80 people have more wealth than half of the world's population. So think hard. With this election, there is an alternative. Someone has to address these things. The major parties aren't. I'm prepared to get up there, and I am prepared to hammer away as hard as I can to get people and to get the government to start to recognise that we can't just paper over things, that there is need for radical change in our society before things get so out of hand that the few not only control the wealth, not only control income levels, but ultimately start to control government through their influence. Thank you for watching.